The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on the training ground as I struggled to keep up with the rest of my unit. Sweat poured down my face, mixing with the dust that seemed to coat everything at Fort Benning. My M4 felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and my legs burned with every step. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing back there?" Commander Jake Sullivan's voice cut through the air like a whip. "My grandmother moves faster than you, and she's been dead for 10 years. I pushed myself harder, trying to close the gap between me and the other soldiers. At 19, I was one of the youngest in the unit, fresh out of basic training and eager to prove myself. But eager didn't seem to be enough. "Sir, I'm trying, sir," I called back, my voice cracking slightly. Sullivan jogged back to where I was struggling, his face a mask of disappointment. At 35, he was a career soldier with 2 tours in Afghanistan under his belt. His weathered face told stories of battles I could only imagine, and his eyes held the kind of hardness that came from seeing too much. "Trying?" He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Kid, you'd never survive real war. You're soft, slow, and you think too much. When bullets start flying, you need instinct, not hesitation." The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. Around us, the other soldiers kept moving, but I could feel their eyes on me. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed to agree with the commander's assessment. "I can do better, sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can you?" Sullivan's voice was cold. "Because right now, I wouldn't trust you to watch my back in a firefight. Hell, I wouldn't trust you to carry my ammo." He turned and jogged back to the front of the formation, leaving me with his words burning in my ears. That night, as I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, I made a promise to myself. I would prove him wrong, no matter what it took. The next 2 years became my obsession. Training consumed my entire life. While other soldiers relaxed during their off time, I was in the gym. While they slept in on weekends, I was on the shooting range. I studied every manual, practiced every drill until my movements became second nature. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, an hour before reveille, to run an extra 5 miles. After dinner, when other soldiers watched TV or played cards, I was in the armory, disassembling and reassembling my M4 until I could do it blindfolded. I memorized every technical specification, every emergency procedure, every combat protocol. Sullivan noticed the change, but he never let up. If anything, he pushed me harder, as if testing the limits of my determination. During urban warfare training, he'd single me out for the most dangerous positions. During night exercises, he'd assign me the most complex tasks. "You're getting better, Martinez," he admitted one day after a particularly grueling exercise. "But better isn't good enough. In real combat, there's no participation trophy. You're either alive or you're dead." I passed every test, exceeded every benchmark, but his words from that first day still echoed in my mind. You'd never survive real war. The months dragged on, each one bringing new challenges and new opportunities to prove my worth. I became an expert in hand-to-hand combat, mastered precision shooting techniques, and learned to operate in conditions that would make other soldiers quit. My physical endurance improved dramatically. I could carry heavy equipment for miles without getting tired, and my reaction speed became almost instinctive. During simulation exercises, I began to stand out. Other soldiers started seeking me out for mission partnerships, and even veteran sergeants began to recognize my competence. But Sullivan maintained his cold facade, always finding something to criticize, always reminding me that training and real combat were 2 completely different things. "Martinez is making good progress," I overheard Sergeant Johnson telling Sullivan one afternoon. "The kid has real potential." Sullivan just grunted. "We'll see. Training's one thing. Real combat's another entirely." In early 2021, our unit received deployment orders. We were heading to Syria as part of a peacekeeping mission that everyone knew was anything but peaceful. The region had been destabilized by years of conflict, and American forces were there to protect humanitarian operations and hunt down remaining terrorist cells. The preparation for deployment was intense. We spent weeks studying the local culture, learning basic Arabic phrases, and familiarizing ourselves with the specific tactics used by insurgents in the region. I absorbed every piece of information like a sponge, determined to be prepared for anything I might encounter. The Syrian landscape was completely different from the Georgia training grounds. Here, danger lurked behind every corner. Every pile of rubble could hide an IED, and every civilian might be an enemy. Our FOB, Forward Operating Base, was a collection of prefabricated buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. A small island of American military might in an ocean of uncertainty. The heat was oppressive, unlike anything I had experienced before. During the day, temperatures often exceeded 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night, the desert cold could be equally brutal. The air was always filled with fine dust that got into everything: your weapons, your food, your lungs. Sullivan had been right about one thing: real war was different. The weight of live ammunition, the constant awareness that someone might be trying to kill you, the way your heart hammered in your chest during patrols. Nothing in training had fully prepared me for this. But I adapted. The months of extra training paid off as I found myself keeping pace with the veterans. My shooting was precise, my reactions quick, and slowly, I began to earn the respect of my fellow soldiers. The first few weeks were the hardest. Every unfamiliar sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I slept poorly, always alert, always expecting the worst. But gradually, I developed what the veterans called combat instinct, the ability to distinguish between real threats and false alarms. My first real patrol was an experience I'll never forget. We walked through a neighborhood that had been the scene of heavy fighting just weeks before. Destroyed buildings lined the streets, and bullet holes marked virtually every surface. The silence was disturbing. There were no children playing, no people on the streets, just the occasional echo of our footsteps on cracked asphalt. "Keep your eyes open," Sullivan murmured through the radio. "This place is too quiet." He was right. In Syria, silence was never a good sign. It meant people were afraid that something was about to happen. My hand tightened around my M4, and I felt adrenaline begin to course through my veins. Nothing happened a day, but the tension was a taste of what was to come. Each subsequent patrol brought new challenges, new fears to overcome. I saw my first civilian casualty, a child who had stepped on a landmine left by insurgents. I helped evacuate wounded soldiers when our convoy was attacked by snipers. I learned that war wasn't just about courage and training, it was about mental survival as much as physical. "Martinez has come a long way," I overheard Sergeant Johnson telling Sullivan one evening. "The kid has potential." Sullivan just grunted. "We'll see. Training's one thing. Real combat's another." His first real opportunity to test me came in June 2021. The convoy was routine, or as routine as anything could be in a war zone. We were escorting a humanitarian aid truck to a village about 30 kilometers from our base. 3 Humvees, 12 soldiers, and enough firepower to handle most threats. I was in the second vehicle with Sullivan, Sergeant Johnson, and Private Chen. The commander sat across from me, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape through the armored windows. Despite everything, I had come to respect him. His harsh training had probably saved more lives than his criticism had hurt feelings. "Village coming up," Johnson announced from the front seat. "Looks quiet." That should have been our first warning. In Syria, quiet was never a good sign. The first RPG hit our lead vehicle before we even saw where it came from. The explosion flipped the Humvee onto its side, and immediately the air filled with the crack of AK-47 fire. Bullets pinged off our armor as our driver, Corporal Stevens, threw the vehicle into reverse. "Contact left! Contact left!" Johnson shouted into his radio. "We've got at least 6 shooters in the building complex." Sullivan was already moving, his rifle ready. "Martinez, Chun, suppressive fire on that building." "Johnson, get me a sit rep on Vehicle 1. I trained for this moment 1,000 times, but the reality was overwhelming. The sound of gunfire was deafening. The smell of cordite and dust filled my nostrils, and every instinct screamed at me to find cover and hide. But Sullivan's training kicked in. I rolled out of the Humvee, found cover behind the engine block, and began returning fire. My shots were measured, precise, just as I'd been taught. 3 quick bursts at the muzzle flashes in the windows across the street. "Good shooting, Martinez," Sullivan called out. "Keep their heads down." The firefight lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. We managed to extract the crew from the overturned Humvee, 2 wounded but alive, and our superior firepower eventually drove off the attackers. As we regrouped, Sullivan looked at me with something that might have been approval. "Not bad for your first real engagement, Martinez. You kept your head." I felt a surge of pride, but I knew this was just the beginning. The real test was still coming. The following weeks brought more patrols, more firefights, more opportunities to prove my worth. I became more confident, more experienced, more capable of handling the stress of combat. Other soldiers began to trust me, and even Sullivan started giving me greater responsibilities. "Martinez is doing well," I heard him tell Captain Rodriguez during a briefing. "He's got good instincts for combat." It was the first time I'd heard him say something positive about me, and I felt a swell of pride. But I knew he was still testing me, still looking for signs of weakness. The mission that would change everything came in August 2021. It was supposed to be a routine patrol through a supposedly cleared sector. Intelligence had reported possible weapons caches in an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of a small town. Our job was to search and clear, nothing we hadn't done dozens of times before. The industrial complex was a maze of concrete buildings, rusted machinery, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. We moved in standard formation, Sullivan leading, me covering the rear, Johnson and Chen flanking. The first building we checked was a huge warehouse filled with abandoned equipment. Industrial machines covered in dust and rust created a labyrinth of perfect hiding spots. We checked every corner, every space where someone could hide, but found nothing. "Building's clear," Johnson reported as we finished searching the third warehouse. "No weapons, no intel, no nothing. Let's check the main office building and get out of here," Sullivan decided. "This place gives me the creeps." The office building was a 3-story concrete structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Windows were broken, debris littered the floors, and graffiti covered the walls. We cleared the first floor methodically, room by room. Each room told a story of abandonment. Overturned desks, papers scattered across the floor, family photographs left behind when people fled the violence. It was a grim reminder of how war destroyed not just lives, but dreams and hopes as well. "Second floor," Sullivan commanded, and we began climbing the stairs. That's when everything went wrong. The explosion came from above us, bringing down part of the ceiling and trapping us in the stairwell. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Sullivan shouting orders, but I couldn't make out the words. Dust and debris filled the air, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. "Martinez! Martinez, you alive?" Sullivan's voice cut through the chaos. "Here, sir," I called back, shaking off the effects of the blast. "I'm okay. Johnson's down." Sullivan's voice was tight with stress. "Chen's trapped under debris. We need to get out of here now." I stumbled through the dust and found Johnson lying unconscious at the bottom of the stairs, blood trickling from a head wound. Chun was pinned under a fallen beam, conscious but clearly in pain. "My leg's broken," Chun gasped. "I can't move it." Sullivan was trying to lift the beam off Chun when the second explosion hit. This one was closer, and I felt the building shudder around us. Through a gap in the debris, I could see muzzle flashes outside. We weren't just trapped, we were under attack. "Sniper!" Sullivan yelled, pulling back from the window. At least 2, maybe 3 shooters in the building across the street. A bullet whined off the concrete near my head, and I dove for cover. Our radio was dead, crushed in the collapse, and our exit routes were blocked by debris. We were trapped, wounded, and outnumbered. "Sir, we need to move Johnson and Chun to better cover," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos. Sullivan nodded, blood running down his face from a cut on his forehead. "You take Johnson, I'll get Chun." We managed to drag our wounded teammates to a more protected area behind some fallen concrete. But our situation was getting worse by the minute. The sniper fire was keeping us pinned down, and I could hear voices outside. Our attackers were getting closer. "Martinez," Sullivan said quietly, "I'm going to try to get to that window, lay down some suppressive fire while you see if you can find another way out." "Sir, that's suicide. The sniper has a clear line of sight on that position." "Maybe, but it's our only chance. Johnson needs medical attention, and Chen's not going anywhere on that leg." I watched Sullivan prepare to make his move, and suddenly I was back in training, hearing his voice. "You'd never survive real war. You're soft, slow, and you think too much." But I wasn't that scared kid anymore. 2 years of training, months of combat experience, and most importantly, watching Sullivan's example had changed me. I knew what I had to do. "Sir, there's another way." "What are you talking about, Martinez?" I pointed to a partially collapsed section of the wall. "I can get through there, circle around to the back of the building. If I can get to higher ground, I can flank the sniper positions." Sullivan stared at me for a long moment. "That's a long shot, kid. If they spot you." "They won't," I said with more confidence than I felt. "I've been studying their pattern. They're focused on our position here. If I move during their reload cycles, I can stay out of sight." "And then what?" "You're one man against at least 3. Then I do what you taught me, sir. I improvise." Sullivan's face was grim, but he nodded slowly. "Okay, Martinez. But you listen to me, you get in trouble out there, you get back here. Don't try to be a hero." "Yes, sir." I checked my rifle, counted my ammunition, and prepared to move. As I reached the gap in the wall, Sullivan grabbed my arm. "Martinez, be careful." "I will, sir." The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I moved through the rubble like a ghost, using every piece of cover, every shadow. The sniper fire continued to pin down my teammates, but I could hear it becoming more sporadic. They were running low on ammunition. Each step was calculated, each movement deliberate. I had learned to move silently, to use shadows to my advantage, to be patient when the situation demanded it. All the training Sullivan had given me, all the discipline he had instilled in me, came down to this moment. I reached the rear of the enemy building and began my ascent. The structure was damaged, but there was enough intact stairwell to get me to the 3rd floor. I could hear voices above me, at least 2 men, speaking in Arabic. The first sniper never saw me coming. I took him out with a single shot to the back of the head. The second one turned at the sound, but I was already moving. 3 quick shots, center mass, and he went down. The third sniper was on the roof, and he was the problem. He had overwatch on the entire area, and he was the one keeping my team pinned down. I could hear him moving around up there, trying to get a better angle on Sullivan's position. I climbed the final flight of stairs and eased open the roof access door. The sniper was about 20 feet away, prone behind a low wall, his rifle trained on the building where my team was trapped. He was completely focused on his targets, unaware that death was creeping up behind him. I took careful aim and fired. With the sniper threat eliminated, I was able to call for backup using the dead enemy's radio. But as I was making my way back to rejoin my team, I heard more gunfire from their position. The remaining attackers had decided to rush the building. When I reached the gap in the wall, I could see Sullivan engaged in close combat with 2 enemy fighters. He was wounded, moving slowly, and clearly outmatched. Johnson was still unconscious, and Chun was trying to fight from his position on the ground despite his broken leg. I didn't hesitate. I entered the building firing, taking down one attacker immediately. The second one spun toward me, but Sullivan managed to get a shot off that dropped him before he could bring his weapon to bear. "Martinez," Sullivan called out, relief evident in his voice. "Damn good timing. Just returning the favor, sir," I replied, moving to check on Johnson and Chun. "How the hell did you get past all those snipers?" "I learned from the best, sir. A very tough instructor once told me that in real combat, there's no participation trophy. You're either alive or you're dead." Sullivan actually smiled at that. Smartass. The evacuation helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. As we loaded Johnson and Chun onto stretchers, Sullivan walked over to me. His face was serious, but there was something different in his eyes. "Martinez, I owe you an apology." "Sir." 2 years ago, I told you that you'd never survive real war. I was wrong. I looked at the man who had pushed me harder than anyone else in my life, who had demanded excellence when I was content with mediocrity, who had prepared me for this moment even when I hated him for it. No, sir. You were right. That kid you met 2 years ago wouldn't have survived real war. But the soldier you trained did. Sullivan extended his hand, and I shook it firmly. You saved my life today, Martinez. Hell, you saved all our lives. Just doing my job, sir. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying us back to base, I reflected on how much had changed since that first day on the training ground. The scared kid who couldn't keep up with his unit was gone, replaced by a soldier who had proven himself in the crucible of combat. Sullivan was right, real war was different from training. But he was also wrong about one thing. I didn't just survive it. I thrived in it. And when my commander needed me most, I was there to pull him out under fire. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who challenge us to be better than we think we can be. Commander Sullivan had been that teacher for me, and in the end, both of us had learned something valuable about what it truly means to be a soldier. 6 months later, I was promoted to sergeant. Sullivan put in the recommendation personally, writing in his report, "Sergeant Martinez represents the best of what the United States Army can produce. His courage under fire, tactical thinking, and dedication to his fellow soldiers make him an asset to any unit." We served together for another year in Syria before rotating back to the States. Sullivan retired from the Army and now works as a military consultant, but we stay in touch. Every Christmas, I get a card from him that simply says, "Proud of you, Martinez." That first day at Fort Benning seems like a lifetime ago now. Sometimes I wonder if Sullivan knew, even then, that his harsh words would push me to become the soldier I needed to be. Maybe he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Or maybe he was just doing what all good leaders do, holding their people to a higher standard than they think they can achieve. Either way, I'm grateful for that day when he told me I'd never survive real war. It gave me something to prove, and in the proving, I found out who I really was. The scared kid who couldn't keep up with his unit is still there, somewhere inside me. But now he's joined by the soldier who pulled his commander out under fire. And that soldier is ready for whatever comes next. War taught me that strength isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Courage isn't not being afraid, but doing what's right even when you're terrified. And sometimes, the people who criticize us the most are the ones who prepare us best for the challenges we'll face. Sullivan taught me that on the battlefield, there's no room for doubt or hesitation. Every decision can mean the difference between life and death, not just for you, but for everyone around you. That knowledge transformed me from an insecure recruit into a confident soldier, capable of leading others in impossible situations. Years later, when I train new recruits, I sometimes see that same look in their eyes that I must have had that first day: fear, uncertainty, doubt about their own capabilities. And when that happens, I remember Sullivan's words and understand that my job isn't just to teach combat techniques, but to forge character. The war in Syria continued long after our departure, but our mission had served its purpose. We saved lives, protected innocence, and made a difference in a world that often seems hopeless. And I learned that sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating the enemy, but overcoming your own limitations. Today, when young soldiers come to me for advice, I always tell them the same thing. Training is hard, but war is harder. Prepare yourself as if your life depends on it, because one day it might. And when they complain that the standards are too high, that the expectations are impossible to meet, I smile and think of Commander Sullivan. Because I know that sometimes, being tough on someone is the greatest kindness you can offer. The story of how a commander told me I'd never survive real war, and how 2 years later I saved him under fire, has become something of a legend in our unit. But for me, it's not about heroism or revenge. It's about growth, about how people can change when they're challenged to be better. Sullivan taught me that the true test of a soldier isn't what happens when everything's going well, but what happens when everything's going wrong. It's easy to be brave when you're safe, but real courage emerges when you're scared, wounded, and outnumbered, but still choose to fight. That day at the industrial complex, When I saw Sullivan fighting two enemies, wounded and outmatched, I didn't hesitate. Not because I wasn't afraid, I was terrified, but because he had taught me that sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the safe thing. The soldier I became was forged in the fire of harsh criticism and relentless expectations. Sullivan didn't make me stronger by being kind to me. He made me stronger by demanding more from me than I thought I could give. And when the time came to prove my worth, I was ready. That's the lesson I carry with me to this day. That the people who challenge us most are often the ones who believe in us most. Sullivan saw potential in me that I didn't know existed, and he pushed me until I found it. In the end, that's what real leadership is about, not just commanding others, but helping them discover what they're truly capable of. Sullivan didn't just train me to be a soldier, he trained me to be a leader. And now, when I look at young recruits struggling with their own doubts and fears, I try to do for them what he did for me. The circle continues, and somewhere out there, another scared kid is about to discover that they're capable of more than they ever imagined. Because sometimes, the people who tell us we can't do something are really telling us exactly what we need to do. And sometimes, proving them wrong is the best way to prove ourselves right.